Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. This season, we're having sweaty conversations for change. We're talking with guests about uncomfortable conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion needed to pivot towards positive change. We do this podcast because it's important that all voices are heard, all people are seen, and all people feel a sense of belonging in their workplaces. Let's meet this week's guest. Welcome to the podcast. So excited for you to meet a friend, a colleague, and someone I have called an ally for many, many years. Danielle Wolter Nolan is with us today. And she grew up in the country, and being outdoors was always second nature. Living in a fast-paced digital age where we live in today, she realized there was a need for more people to unplug from technology and reconnect with themselves and in nature. So this is one of the many reasons she and her wife, Kate, founded DNK Presents. Together, they organized and guided hundreds of people on adventures in and outside of Indiana. She's blessed to share that passion for the great outdoors while helping individuals and groups build confidence and empowerment through adventure experiences. Welcome to the show, Danielle.
Thanks so much for having me, Julie.
Well, so much to talk about. And I love the purpose of your organization. And at a time when people are burnout, mental health is staggeringly such an issue in the workplace and just in society as a whole. I think this return to the great outdoors is just so human and so natural, and can't wait to dive into that as a strategy for folks that might be struggling with that in their own lives. But before we do that, Danielle, being a member of the LGBTQ plus community, I'd just love to hear, your perspective on what challenges or what things or what candid conversations have you had about diversity, and let our listeners know, just kind of give us a window into your world.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my wife, Kate, and I, we happily live our lives openly, gay as a lesbian couple. And we have two small children as well. And, we're very fortunate that we live our lives every day, with our family and the LGBTQ community. And for the most part, we are very accepted, where we live and in the industry we're in. But we still definitely face discrimination. Recently, I was actually being interviewed for a radio show, and I was connected with this guy that does this radio show, and he knew even that, Kate, my wife, and I own the company, own DNK Presents, and as most people do, and it's pretty evident when you go to our website or any social media, we post things about our lives and being married and our family, and we're very open about that. And so I never hide that from anyone. And we were doing kind of a pre-interview, and then we did a whole separate conversation about all the questions that, he was going to ask me for this radio interview show that's live. And it's syndicated and pretty big audience, and did that whole thing, which was like an hour of this pre-recorded episode of all the questions, that he was going to ask me. And I talked about, how Kate and I started the company, and, how that's the outdoors has been such an impact in our lives, and how it's important for us, how the outdoors has been important for us to really be our most authentic selves. And that's helped us in our personal lives and our professional careers, being, living openly gay and all these things. And then, and he was, we're doing this interview and all of this. And then he said, I talked to him a few days later and he was like, I have something to discuss with you. And he said, your business is great and you have, I want to do the interview, but I was wondering if you could not refer Kate, if you could just refer to Kate as your business partner instead of,
Oh,
your life partner. And I was completely blown away that he asked me to do that.
just pretend
And
you're not actually married or in a committed relationship. Just like leave that part of yourself. Like, wow.
right. Yeah. And because he first went into, and I could see where this was going. And in the beginning, I kind of felt like some, and you're always just like, okay, trust your gut, right? But I was like, I'm going to go ahead and do it because it is a big syndicated show. But I kind of looked on his social media and things that he posts a lot. And I was kind of like, oh, I don't know. And it is actually, it's in the outdoor arena. And when he called me back, he was like, I have something to discuss with you. And he was like, there's a few things I don't talk about on my show. He's like, I don't have any, he was saying he doesn't have any hunters on his show. He doesn't have any religious figures or any political figures. He doesn't go into those topics. And he's like, he's like, so I was wondering if you, could refer to Kate just as your business partner. And I was like, absolutely not. I was like, this is not going to work.
Good for you.
Yeah. I was like, even if, which I never would, I wanted to, there's no way I could reverse my language from like our whole time of, being married for 6 years and then like dating for, like I've never just said, well, my business partner, and not, I don't know. It was, I didn't even think I could do that anyway. And I wouldn't have anyway. And I said, this is not going to work. And I just said, this is really unprofessional. This is, I thought about going back and like writing a long email, and I never did. But, Kate was like, like, should say, and I was like, well, I did on the phone. I said, this is not going to work. This is really unacceptable. This is discriminatory. You're saying that it's okay for example, your straight couples or like a straight person you have on your show to talk about their spouse, but I can't talk about my spouse because she's a woman.
Right. Right.
So that's why it's not okay. But anyways, it was just crazy because we went through the whole thing. And then, obviously something happened and he went back and was like worried, that's going to diminish his audience and obviously, not a good fit. So better,
Yep. Better know that than have him say something homophobic later and be like, oh my gosh, I was on that show.
Yeah. And I went back and because there was a woman who connected me with him and like through email. And I immediately called her and told her everything. And she was like, she was like totally apologetic. And she was like, I can't believe this happened. And even in the email, she said like her wife and her own, and this woman, she guides for us. So she, but she said, she's a teacher as well. And she said she had a call from that guy as well. And she was like, but I called you back first. And I was like, oh, well, I'm sure he's calling you because of the conversation we just had. So just letting you know. But that was kind of the most recent thing that's happened. And
Danielle, like how often does that kind of stuff happen? Just to give our listeners who are straight, cisgender that, have the option. Well, I wouldn't even say option, just the freedom to openly talk about their partners and spouses and family members without fear. of retribution. I think that's just a huge sign of privilege that I can talk about my husband and no one's going to, look at me sideways or say I can't on a podcast of all
Yeah.
things. Like, how often does that stuff happen?
It really, I would say it honestly doesn't happen as much as you might think, or as maybe other people might think. But I do believe there's things that happen that I don't even know about. You know what I mean? Like that maybe I do get connected with somebody and and maybe something doesn't go anywhere because they have found out, that
Mhm.
we're in the LGBTQ community. But there's no, like, I would, like, I don't know all of those things all the time, but the ones that I do know about, I mean, yeah, it happens. And you think like, you're always like, oh, like things are so like making progress. And
Things are so
then,
much better than they used to be.
yeah.
I love them when people say that, like white people, straight people are like, it's so much better than it was 20 years ago. Like, how so? Right. And with, I think with the LGBTQ plus community, and I've had really good spirited debates with folks in the community on the podcast before of like, I think for allyship, there's a huge lesson learned in what the LGBTQ plus community has been able to do as far as
Mhm.
social change goes very quickly, with at least the exception, at least the perception and acceptance of gay marriage.
Yeah.
We're north of 70% of Americans being okay with that. And that's tripled since we were young people. So
Mhm.
that's kind of cool, but obviously not enough. I mean, you look at the news cycle and it's so easy to see, homophobia being very accepted in mainstream culture and media, and still so many pejorative references and hurtful things. And I think, Danielle, the biggest thing I see from my allies in the community is that you have to constantly kind of out yourself still. That,
Yeah.
and
Oh
I'm sure
yeah.
you deal with that, right? Living in rural, and Danielle, for our listeners, lives in a very rural part of Indiana, not in Indianapolis where I live, where we've got a lot of work to do here, but there's definitely a high level of acceptance just based on what I've seen from the Pride Parade and some of our community events. But you're living
Yeah.
in an area where, that I'm sure that people maybe don't understand, or if they do, they probably still fumble and say the wrong thing sometimes.
Oh yeah. I That definitely happens. And yeah, I mean, just little things that and even like we own like a bike shop, so we have a physical, storefront now, and we're in downtown Nashville, Indiana. So Brown County, Indiana, which is, yeah, it's a very rural part of the state. And
Mhm.
luckily we do have some good, Bloomington is close, and Columbus, and there's some cultural diversity close by to us, which is nice. But yeah, there's definitely still a long way to go here. And when people walk in, yeah, and because it's been different having a physical location too, because I'm in front of people, saying my wife and I own the shop, and that, yeah, isn't something I think everyday folks that live in the country like here. So
Mhm.
um yeah, but for the most part, I mean, we've had great, acceptance here, but there's still and then there's still a lot of things too, with a lot of questions come up about our kids, um that, yeah, I mean, it's always, I don't know, people have a really personal, I feel like, questions to ask
Yeah.
us about, like, oh, so, oh, they assume that they're adopted too.
Yeah.
And then I say, well, actually, like, I carried both babies. And then that's another just like eye-popping statement. I mean, so then it's like, how did you do that? So
How did you
um
decide who was going to carry the babies? And how did you
yeah.
decide how the babies came to be? Like, I can only imagine. And I have to be honest, I have I've also had those thoughts because I'm so deeply curious, but
Yeah.
I also recognize my privilege in not having to disclose that information to people because I
Yeah.
followed kind of, for lack of a better word, the standard, more of the, heteronormative approach to things when I had my babies. But the
Mhm.
questions people ask, I think, do
Yeah,
come
and
from
it's
curiosity, but they're inappropriate, right?
yeah. Well, and you truly are different because you're a friend and I know you, but people I've never met will say things that I am that I can't, it's like, oh, so you and then yeah, it's all these things, yeah, they assume about
Yeah.
yeah, how we have had the kids, and they're like,
Mhm.
oh, adoption's great, and then it's like, well, it is, but we did not adopt. And
Right.
yeah, I should, and then it's like, how did you do that? And it's like, well,
Well,
go into yeah, all
and
these.
and and I want to give you opportunity to talk about what you do for work, but while we're on this conversation, kind of I appreciate the personal just details that you've shared already, but I think as the kids get school age, right, that's what I start to notice with
Yeah.
my friends that are of color or my friends that, have gender non-binary kids, when they start to go into the school system. And I'm noticing this with my daughter, in second grade, is people
Mhm.
start to ask questions. So we've really tried to normalize, at least with our daughter, for what it's worth, that there's all sorts of different kinds of families. Some families have a mom and a dad, some have two moms. And luckily, we have a few friends that Jane gets to spend time with and see that play out. So it's more normalized for her. But I think for
Mhm.
a lot of kids, they don't know that and they question it and they might have again that curiosity, but teeter on the line of like, that's really not a good question or thing to say. Right. So I think,
Mhm.
I know Asher's pretty young still, probably not ready for big conversations like that. But have you thought at all about that piece of it as they enter school, like how to think about that or navigate that with other parents and kids?
I know. It's already, we've already kind of talked about it with even our daycare because she um is so great, and there's not many options here in Brown County,
Right.
but she we're so wonderful like that we got into her. She's a small in-home daycare, and very early on she was like, I've never had a gay family, and so I'm not like, do you want me to refer to you both as like mom or mama? Are you mom? Like, are you mommy? And she's like, and with the other kids, because I'll say so and so's dad's here, and so we had a conversation with her, and I thought it was so great that she came to us and was like, I'm not sure the best way, like, I don't know the correct language, you want me to use because I've never been in this situation. And, for me and Kate, I mean, we're very like kind of go with the flow, happy go lucky people, so we didn't think about it either, but we were like, wow, yeah, we should, have a conversation about it. And I mean, and the other kids at the daycare now are like, yeah, I'm one of Asher's moms, and they're learning at a young age too, like, like Asher has two moms, two moms, like, and then it's, yeah, the whole
Yeah,
thing.
not just
But
one. I know I
yeah,
used
yeah,
to say bonus mom, but I was like, that's not appropriate, right? Because it's not a bonus. That's actually like two moms. That just is it, like two moms,
yeah,
period.
yeah, 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 I know, yeah.
It's
Yeah, so
it's
the language
nuanced.
I think is, yeah, really important. And I've seen the kid, and and I've talked, I mean, some of the other parents, we're friends with, and they're like, we didn't have not had conversations about like different families and all this before. But I mean, the kids are so great. I mean, they're just like, oh, like it's just like that's a normal thing,
Yeah,
like,
they don't even
oh, they
question, like,
have,
okay, cool. Moving
yeah, and then
on.
they move on to the next, building block,
Yep.
And you know this way more, Julie, because this is what you're in, but it's like adults, we make this huge deal out of all these crazy things, all
Mhm.
these things that really, should be normalized. And kids are like, oh, okay, you have two moms, you have two dads, or, you know,
Right.
um, one of your moms is um, brown and your dad is not. And,
Yeah.
that's, yeah, okay, cool. And then they move on. Like,
Yep.
it's just, yeah. And then, but as adults, it's, yeah, we get all,
Tongue-tied and
yeah.
awkward, and then I think the more awkward we get, the more we talk, which is always a weird behavior to watch. You're like, if you don't understand something, why wouldn't you just listen and observe and take it in versus I had this happen recently with a man that was really vulnerable with me, and he goes, so the reason people talk when they feel uncomfortable is because they're insecure and they're so afraid that they just keep talking to like keep their nerves calm. I was like,
Jeez.
that is such a
Yeah.
weird behavior, but having observed several of those instances, like that makes more sense, and it is odd. So listeners, if you want to ask a curious question, I like what you said, Danielle. Make sure that you know somebody, they have a trusted relationship with them, so it feels like it's coming from a positive place. Always get to know the person first, and then if you're curious, I don't know how you feel about this, but just asking, I tend to ask for permission. Like, hey, I have like a curious question. Is it okay if I ask you? And you can tell me no, if it's too much. But I'm just genuinely curious. And this is why I'm asking.
Yeah.
I tend to frame it that way instead. And I think as a general rule of thumb, don't ask a question you wouldn't ask to somebody of the majority group, right? Don't ask, I've heard so many things over the years, especially the LGBTQ plus community, like don't ask about things that happen in bedrooms, right? Like that's not something you
Oh,
would ask your straight friends. So don't do that, right?
yeah. That's, yeah. I
Right.
mean, come on. Yeah.
Come on. Yeah.
Think, yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Right.
There's some things just don't ever
Don't
ask.
don't
But
don't go
yeah,
there. Right.
don't
So
go
there's
there.
boundaries. I think in a genuine curiosity and trust and rapport first. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your story. And I hope whoever this show host is, that there's accountability for that behavior. And definitely, I think there's a lot of great nuggets you shared that are helpful for our listeners wrestling with these candid conversations and might have overheard something like that or been a part of something that themselves. And I really appreciate that you were very firm. And you didn't have to do the explaining, but explaining why that was harmful. I want to shift gears a bit, Danielle, to what y'all do with DNK Presents. I've had the chance to participate and see y'all in action. It's just so incredible, the purpose of your business. I know it's a lot about getting women in the outdoors. I know you work with all genders too, but getting folks to experience nature and doing trips and bike riding, all sorts of things. How did y'all come up with this idea? And just walk us through. It's been several years in business. How has it progressed?
Yeah, this is something Kate and I have always loved the outdoors, and we love being able to, get other people outside and really empower themselves, help people build confidence and empower themselves through different outdoor experiences and activities. And that, um, again, has really fulfilled us in our lives. And, and we just, we're doing these things early on in our relationship and kind of sharing photos, and then it just kind of grew organically in that people, our friends and friends of friends, were saying, oh, I've always wanted to do something like that, but and there was always these buts or these barriers. We felt like, I don't know where to go. I don't know what equipment I need. I wouldn't feel safe going alone, all these things. And we thought, okay, I feel like people want to get out more. But again, there's all these walls. And if we could kind of break down those barriers and make it easier for people to try something new in nature, that we could do this for folks. And and that was it. We officially started the business in 2014. And really early on, we never thought that we would focus primarily on women or people who identify as female. But in a lot of the trainings and certifications that Kate and I were getting early on, we found, first of all, that we were usually one of the only women in the room. And then whenever we started doing trips, and we kind of thought, where are all the women? But, I think we both were brought up in a way that we just did things, like we did sports, we did, activities, and never thought about like being less than because we were women. So we didn't think a whole lot of it. But whenever, especially, we started hosting trips open to the public, we got mostly pretty much all women. And now through, surveys that we've done, and also data we've found and researched, that most women feel more comfortable learning in an environment with others, surrounded by other women. And
Yep.
and imagine that. Yeah. And especially doing the things we do where we're going out in the wilderness, it's, very, you're getting very vulnerable very quickly. There's a great deal of trust that people have to have in Kate and I, or whoever's guiding the trip, because there's limited cell signal. There's doing something for the first time that they haven't done, and all these things. And that there's a great gender inequity in outdoor leadership. So there are very few women as leaders or guides in the outdoors. So there was that as well. So we thought, so we started gravitating, towards women only, or again, people who identify as female only trips, because we really wanted to help empower women to feel more confident and comfortable in the outdoors. And again, there aren't as many women even recreating in the outdoors as opposed to men. So
that's great.
It's been a great ride. And I mean, it's been super fun.
I love the inspiration. Like, y'all had a passion that you shared together. You saw a bigger need for others, and you listened to what people were looking for, and have really, I think, come a long way. And building, like, every time I see something new that y'all are offering, a new adventure, your documentary, which I think the tagline that still sticks with me. I think it was 5 years ago when I Jane, my daughter, was like 2, and I remember us coming to the screening outside. It was so fun. It was like, when was the last time you did something for the first time? If I remember that correctly. Am I saying it wrong?
Yes, that's right. When was the last time you did something for the first time? Yeah.
And that's such a great question for our listeners. Like, when was the last time you did something you were an amateur at, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so, what we know about our adult brains, back to how kids think and how adults think, is our adult brains, like, we kind of go on autopilot, and we like to do things that are safe and comfortable, and that's not how we learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from seeing like the experiences of folks that have gone, away for weekends or longer trips, even with y'all as guides, there's a transformation that you see with folks, even just in a few short days of that shared experience together. So, Danielle, I'm kind of curious, with everything we're dealing with in the workplace right now. We have a lot of mental health issues. Folks have been cooped up in their video screens and working longer hours, and with our kids, and teaching them at home, and all sorts of things. How could, like, now is like the time to get reconnected with nature? how could people take advantage of the outdoors? Maybe in a way that isn't necessarily going away for the week in the woods, but like, what are some baby steps and things that listeners could do if they're wrestling, like most people are, with just mental health and stress in general?
Oh, totally. I mean, and there's so much data and research that shows that literally, even if you can't even physically go outside, just looking, if you even look outside a window, even looking at a picture of nature actually releases brain toxins in our brain to relax. And that's why there's more pictures of nature in hospitals now, because it can boost your immunity. So even if you, so I mean, it's just the outdoors is so powerful in that way. But I would say baby steps, if you are working from home and you're juggling, with the kids being remote or non-remote learning, try to, just start taking some time to, if you can walk, walk outside. Even if it's in between, meetings that you have. Like, I have a friend that just started a job fully remote, and she's like all day long, she's like, I'm just in back-to-back Zoom meetings, and
I
it's,
know.
and she's so and I'm like, if you can just walk outside, and even if you can't like take a walk, down your street or down the block, like just take, like, if you can take 10 deep breaths, and
Mhm.
maybe just close your eyes, or like look up at the sky, so at least your eyes are getting like a different like vantage point, and so if you can just start with deep breathing, outdoors, and then if you can start to incorporate, longer walks right outside your door, that would be, my first, step to just try and see what you can do. Just the deep breathing, walking outside. If you have a window, if you can just look outside, if you're stuck in meetings all day in front of the screen, um, we've got to do what we can, but that's the first step. And
Yeah.
if you can, build from there.
Yeah. I love that idea. It's one of my teammates has a picture of, I believe it's Vietnam on her background. So when she'll
Mhm.
pull up her Zoom screen, it's this beautiful landscape picture. I mean, it doesn't look real, but it's something she actually took.
Oh,
And sometimes we look at it and like, man, that just takes me to a different place. So your point, like you don't have to do
cool.
something as bold as like spending a week in the woods. I mean, you can, and I'm sure you'd have great results. But
Yeah.
looking at a picture, or what I've found is in the morning, my daughter gets on the bus at 7:20, which is, pretty early, but I think probably pretty normal, or maybe even later than some kiddos.
Mhm.
But all that to say, we try to go out at 7:15 and sit outside together. And right now,
Mhm.
this time of year, the sun's not out, unfortunately, but seeing the sun in the morning for 5 minutes and spending time outside, we have really
Yeah.
great conversations just about life in general. And it reminds me to keep that space, stay off my phone, just focus on
Yeah.
the moment. I can't do anything else but just be there. And that's been hugely helpful for me and just my mental energy in the morning versus, just jumping right into like responding to the universe and
Oh,
giving
yeah.
that power away for your
Yes.
mental
And
health.
oh, yeah, and it totally helps you mentally too when you have, you think like, "Oh, I've just gotta, like, go, 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 and never have any breaks," but really, we know that when we
Mhm.
do give ourselves more breaks and we take that time to unplug and just be, with your breath and with yourself, like outside if you can, or connecting, just one on one with your family, that is so impactful to our mental health.
Mhm.
And that, makes, yeah, totally, your productivity, your creativity is boosted in so many ways. We just have to, yeah, remind ourselves. And I can tell you, my 2.5-year-old, if I'm on my phone too much, he starts acting up, and I'm like,
Yep.
okay, I've got to
I
like go back
know.
the other room.
I know. I know. My 1-year-old, she starts squawking as soon as she sees me on that thing. And I'm like, oh my
Uh,
gosh, 'cause she wants attention. Um,
yeah.
And it actually noticed a mood change with us too, because we're not usually happy people when we're doing the social comparison game or the FOMO game, that our phones can bring sometimes. So
Uh-huh.
a healthy boundary with your phone, easier said than done. I try to put my phone like away from me, at least from like 9 in the morning to like 7 in the morning, like 10 hours. Like it is away, it's somewhere else. I'm not going to look at it. Some days better
Yeah,
than not, but
that's great. Yeah, all those things. And yeah, when I get to be outside and just, yeah, be away from all the devices,
so freeing.
yeah, it is. It's so freeing. It's so great. So,
I think you've inspired me to schedule an outdoor trip sometime soon. So
heck yeah,
I
do it.
will I will say, listeners, like just finding some time outside. I mean, I know it's, even if it's cold out, getting a nice big warm coat and just breathing that fresh air. It's how we're intended to be as humans. So finding that space, almost always people feel so much better. I know this fall we took a whitewater rafting trip, my daughter and I, and it was just
Oh,
4 hours, out on the river with a guide, a female guide, which was really cool.
awesome.
Um, but all that to say, I mean, wow, I remember feeling like at the end of that 4 hours, like, how did that go by so quickly? I wish there
Yeah.
was more. Why don't I do this more often? Right. And so just being really intentional with the time you can spend outside. And if you're not an outdoors person, right, I think you've offered some really great suggestions for just incorporating pictures of nature or thoughts or mindfulness
Yeah.
too. But for most folks, getting that fresh air and spending some time doing something new can be really helpful. Well, you've shared so many great ideas, and thanks so much for a window into your world, Danielle. Tell our listeners, how can they follow your work, get in touch, and learn more about DNK Presents?
Yeah. Our website, it's dnkpresents.com. And we're on social media as well, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can find, my contact info there. Or you can always email hello@dnkpresents.com. And if you have any questions about, any type of, we organize and guide empowering adventure retreats for individuals, groups, and businesses. So if you, have an interest or question, feel free to reach out.
Thank you. We'll link to that in the show notes. And Danielle, thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Diversity Pivot podcast. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you're on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our new signature Lead Like an Ally online self-paced learning program. It's comprehensive, and it includes an online learning platform packed with tools, stories, and ideas to become an even better ally. Head over to leadlikeanally.com to learn more.